Namaste, everyone, and welcome to our satsang this morning. It's good to be together with all of you. The peace prayer, the Shanti mantra, Om Dhyau Shanti, usually chanted at the conclusion of an event. But I want to begin with this peace prayer this morning because of the violence that continues to rage in so many parts of our world. So I ask that we keep the victims of war and violence in our minds and in our hearts as we begin our satsang this morning. I will recite the peace prayer. Om Dhyau Shanti. May there be peace and space. Antariksham Shanti. May there be peace in the skies. Prithivim Shanti. May there be peace on earth. Apa Shanti. May there be peace in the oceans. Oshadhaya Shanti. May there be peace in the plants. Vanaspataya Shanti. May there be peace in our forests. Vishvedeva Shanti. May there be peace in the elements. Brahma Shanti. May there be peace in the Creator. Sarvam Shanti. May there be peace everywhere. Shantireva Shanti. Peace and only peace. Sama Shantiredhi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And may there be peace in our minds and in our hearts. Om Shanno Mitra Shamvarunaha. Shanno Bhavatvaryama. Shanna Indro Brihaspatihi. Shanno Vishnurukramaha. Namo Brahmane. Namaste Vayo. Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi. Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami. Ritam Vadishyami. Satyam Vadishyami. Tanmamavatu. Tadvaktaram avatu. Avatu mam. Avatu vaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Srunuyama Deva. Bhadram Pashyamakshya Jatraha. Stirair Angair Tushtuvagum Sastunubhihi. Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu. Swasti na Indro Vriddhasravaha. Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedaha. Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedaha. Swasti na Staksho Arishtanemihi. Swasti no Brihaspatir Dhadatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sahana Vavatu. Sahanau Bhunaktu. Sahaviryam Karavavahai. Tejasvina Varhitamastu. Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This is the fourth discussion on the wisdom of the Upanishads. We started with a conversation between Yajnavalkya and his wife Maitri. We moved on to a conversation between the father Aruni and his son Shvetaketu. And on the last occasion, we discussed the conversation between Narada, the great scholar, and his teacher, brother, Sanat Kumara. I want to begin this morning with just a brief word about that conversation, the Narada Sanat Kumara conversation. As you will recall, Narada was a very great scholar, a very accomplished scholar by the standards of his own time. In fact, I would say by all standards, he was a very learned man. And yet, in spite of his great learning, his vast accomplishments, his fame as a teacher and a scholar, he came to discover a deep sorrow, a deep suffering in his heart. And so he went to his teacher, Sanat Kumara, and he declared a long list of all the disciplines, the academic disciplines that he had mastered. And at the end of it, said basically, I am in sorrow. Today, we would name Narada's predicament differently. We would say that Narada was depressed. This is the likely terminology that we would use. I am fully aware that depression has many causes, and there are varieties of depression. So I'm not making a judgment, please, or presenting myself as an expert on depression. All I wanted to do in these opening remarks is to name Narada's problem as a human problem that requires a unique solution. Because I think in our world today, we would not only name it as depression, but we'd probably want to suggest a solution different from the one in the Upanishads. We would probably recommend a pharmaceutical solution for someone like Narada. But this is a form of depression that will not be resolved by chemical intervention. It is a well-known form of depression. Let me give you an example from a different tradition, a different culture. I wrote about this in one of my books, The Advaita Worldview, trying to illustrate this condition, this well-known condition in the Upanishads. And this is from the writings of the great Russian author, Leo Tolstoy, who Gandhi read very, very closely. At the pinnacle of his success, when he was wealthy, he was famous, and he enjoyed life and the love of his family, Tolstoy was gripped by an unshakable sorrow. All that he had formerly sought and found delight in suddenly seemed to lack meaning and significance. And this is what I'm now quoting from Tolstoy. All this, wrote Tolstoy, took place at a time when, so far as all my outward circumstances went, I ought to have been completely happy. I had a good wife who loved me and who I loved, good children on a large property which was increasing with no pains taken on my part. I was more respected by my kinsfolk and acquaintance than I had ever been. I was loaded with praise by strangers, and without exaggeration, I could believe my name already famous. And yet, I could give no reasonable meaning to my life. I could give no reasonable meaning to my life. And he experienced a sorrow not dissimilar to Narada, and embarked on his own search. In the Mundaka Upanishad, there was the famous verse, Parikshalokan karmachitan nirvedamayat. That if we live thoughtfully and if we live reflectively, at some point in time, we would all ask, what is the meaning of my existence? What is the deeper reason for my life? And this kind of questioning is where Narada came to, and in the case of Tolstoy, his reflection also brought him to that point. Surely, as I said, we will name it as a depression, but it has its own unique solution in spirituality, in spiritual teaching, in spiritual wisdom. It is not a pathological condition. It is a condition that comes about from lack of meaning in life. And one of the things that good religious traditions do is to provide deeper meaning to human existence. This is what Narada sought. This is what Tolstoy himself also sought. So today I want to turn again in our discussion to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, chapter 6 of this text, and to look at another kind of encounter, slightly different from the three that we have seen before, but another very interesting and insightful encounter. More metaphorical in nature, let me put it in that way, than the three that we have seen so far, but equally instructive for our purposes. So in chapter 6, section 1, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad tells us of an occasion when the various organs of the human body started to dispute among themselves about which one was the greatest, which one was more important than all the others. So they had some discussion among themselves, but they could not find consensus. They could not find agreement. So in this text, unable to resolve this matter among themselves, they decided to go to the Creator to solicit the Creator's advice. So they approached the Creator, Brahma, and asked him this question: Ko no Vashishta iti? Vashishta, could you tell us who among us is Vashishta, is the most exalted, the most important? That's what the word Vashishta means, exalted. So, ko naha Vashishta iti. Who among us, naha? Which one? Kaha. Which one among us is the most exalted? So then Brahma, he knew that they were all arguing without resolving this problem. So he came up with a method through which they could find out, beyond any doubt or dispute, who among them is the most exalted. So what is that method? Yasmin va utkranta idam shariram papio manyate savo vashishta iti. So this is how you can discover who among you is a Vashishta, is the most exalted. Yasmin va utkranta idam shariram. This body, idam shariram. Which one of you, utkranta, which one of you, upon departing from this body, papio manyate, this body would become wretched, as it will. It will no longer function. So if you could make that inquiry, then you will know which one among you is the most wretched. So he gave them a method for the resolution of this dispute. Let us see. Which one among you, upon departing, makes the body impossible to function as an organism? He knew, but he didn't want to offend them. We can imagine. Let them find it out for themselves. If I say, this one is the most exalted, they will continue to argue. So he comes up with a good strategy to decide who is more important. So where do they start? So they started with Vag, the organ of speech. So they said, speech, you leave first. And you stay away, samvatsaram. You stay away for 1 year and let's see what happens. So speech, Vag, the organ of speech, departed from the body, stayed away for 1 year, and then returned and asked them, Katama shakata madrite jivitumiti. How did you manage to live? Did you live without me? Did you manage to live without me? Or how did you manage to live without you? So they replied, Yatha kala avadanto vacho. Just as a person who is unable to speak, who has lost the ability to speak through the organ of speech, lives, but pranataha pranena, but breathes, continues to breathe, continues to see, sranvanta srotrena, continues to hear, vidvamso manasa, continues to think, prajayamana retasa, can even have progeny or children, evam jivismiti pravivesha havak. This is how we lived. We lived as someone who can't speak, but all of these other functions worked fine. So pravivesha havak. So speech heard that and said, okay, I'll come back. I'll come back into the body. So speech returned into the body. And then the next one, they said, okay, eyes, chakshuhu, eyes, let's try and see what happens if you leave. So the eyes departed. Tat samvatsaram, stayed away for 1 year and came back, asked the same question. Kathama shakata madrite jivitamiti. How did you live without me? And so, the Upanishad repeats itself. They said, we lived just as someone who has lost his or her sight live. We lived without seeing through the eyes, but we continue to breathe, we continue to speak, we continue to hear, we continue to think, and we continue having children through the organs of reproduction. So, praviveshaha chakshuhu. So the eye said, okay, I will return. Eyes came back to the body. So whose turn it is now? Srotra, the air. So the air say, now it's my turn. Upanishad repeats. The air goes out, stays for 1 year, and comes back, asks the same question. How did you manage to live without me? And they said, well, we lived as someone who has lost his or her hearing would live without hearing through the air, but we continue to breathe, we continue to speak, we continue to see, we continue to think, and we continue to have children through reproduction. So air says, pravivesha strotram. So, okay, I will return. And then, so these are the senses, we can add other senses as well. The text doesn't cover all of the senses, but it's for illustration only. You can add sense of taste or sense of touch, sense of smell. Many people lost their sense of smell with COVID, but the text applies in that sense. They managed well. Most difficult was couldn't smell coffee on mornings, and some people lost the sense of taste also, and they would answer in a similar way. We lost the sense of taste, but we saw, we heard, and so on. Next was the manaha, mind. So it was the turn of the mind to go out, and then same. Tat samvatsaram, stayed away for 1 year and came back and said, how did you manage to live without me? And then Upanishad even gets a little bit humorous and funny in this line. And the text says, they all told the mind, we lived just like fools live, without thinking. We lived just like unthinking people do. Fools do without thinking. But we were able again to breathe, to speak, to see, to hear, and we could still have children. Just that, we lived irrationally. We live without knowledge, and so on. So even the mind says, okay, I am not indispensable. Praviveshaha manaha. So the mind returned back to the physical body. And then it was the turn of the organs of reproduction, retu, also went for 1 year and came back like the others and says, how did you manage to live without me? And they said, we lived just like people who do not have children live. Again, repeating, breathing, speaking, hearing, seeing, but thinking also. And pravivesha ha retaha. And so the organs of reproduction returned also to the body. So the senses, the mind, and the reproductive organs, so far discussed in the Upanishadic text. And then who's next? Ataha ha prana. Prana, the breath. So then it was the time, the opportunity, or the turn for breath to leave. And then in the text, something interesting happened. Ataha prana utkrama vishyanyatha. Just as the breath was about to leave, as it began the process of departure, the other organs found themselves, the text says, being uprooted. Uprooted. It gives a very beautiful example. Just as a beautiful horse, a fine horse, and actually names the region of India, Just as a fine horse, an elegant horse from the Sindh region, pulls out the pegs to which its feet are tied. So imagine a horse with its 4 feet tied to pegs, and the horse begins to move and uproots the pegs. Similarly, when the breath started to depart, all of the organs felt themselves being uprooted along with the breath. And what happened? They screamed out, Ma Bhagava Utkrami. Please, please, do not leave. Do not leave. Why? We cannot live without you. If you leave, we all die. We can't live without you. And then the breath says, then balim kuruteti tatheti. Then give me the tribute. I am Vashishta. I am the exalted one. I am the one in the absence of which nothing else in the body flourishes. So you must give me the recognition, the tribute that I am Vashishta. Tasyo me balim kuruteti. And they all said tatheti. Yes, we agree. There is no dispute now. We know who is the one without which the body does not function. You are the exalted one, prana. You are the exalted one. In Sanskrit, as I'm sure you all know, living beings, one of the words that we use for a living being is a prani. We are all pranis, which literally means those who breathe. Living beings are called pranis, breathing beings, those who breathe. One can live in some way or the other, not perfectly, of course, without seeing, hearing, even without thinking, without reproducing. But no living being can live without breathing. How much we have understood that. I can't breathe became a famous expression here in Minnesota under very tragic circumstances. And this is the cry we heard from so many who lost their lives in COVID. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So it does not surprise us, therefore, that while the other organs could survive without each other, none could exist without the breath. It's the most powerful indicator of the presence of life, not only in a human being, but in living beings. The absence of breath, as you know, in ancient societies. Today we have other more sophisticated methods as we regard these for telling the difference between life and death. But in ancient times, that was the most obvious sign of death. Cessation of breathing was used as the indicator of death. Moving from the Upanishad, this beautiful account in the Upanishads, Shankara himself in his commentary says, this is a metaphor that the Upanishad is telling us. I move now to ask, what do we learn from this account? And of course, we continue to learn, and there are these kinds of narratives continue to teach us as we reflect upon them. And that reflection is a continuous, an ongoing one. We see more and more in an account like this through study, swadhyaya, through reflection, manana. So let me just lift up a few of the insights that I see, I retrieve from this story to share with you. And I'm sure you will have some insights of your own as well. So we witness here a dispute among the organs of the body to determine who is more important and who is the least important, or who is dispensable. The concern to establish importance and indispensability, what happened? This threatened the very life of the body and had to be terminated. The experiment had to be brought to an end quickly because the vitality of the whole became threatened by this concern with establishing and proving who is the most exalted and who is the least exalted. The body is an interdependent biological entity that thrives best when all of the organs work functionally together. That's how interdependent systems work. But we could take this story from the Upanishads and translate it to our lives in families, our lives in communities, our lives in nations, our lives in the world. How do we do that? Simply by seeing clearly that relationships suffer, relationships are threatened, relationships fall apart when members of these families, communities, nations, the world, when members are obsessed with self-importance, want to establish and prove greater and lesser worth, then they threaten the well-being of the family, the whole, the community, the nation, the world. There is no, thinking of it globally, what happens is that there is no concern for the common good. A thriving, a flourishing family is one in which people do not compete to establish who is Vashishta. Everyone's value is affirmed. Everyone's contribution is acknowledged. So this was the great flaw in which the organs engaged, which led us, we saw, almost a catastrophic end where they may all lost their presence, and the body itself was going to be destroyed. So whether we are speaking of a leader, political or religious leader, once you get into that egocentric mode of being, where you want to assert your own Vashishta, self-importance over all, then there is going to be, then the integrity of the whole is going to be threatened. History is a very good example, past and right on to the present day. And we can see this in the light. There's a very famous line in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3. Parasparam bhavayantaha sreya paramavapsyata. Parasparam bhavayantaha. By ensuring that we enable each one to flourish. Parasparam. By ensuring the flourishing of each member, whether we're speaking of the family, the community, the nation, the world. Parasparam bhavayantaha sreya paramavapsyata. We all flourish. We all attain the highest. In the Bhagavad Gita, this way of being, not rivalry for establishing one's superiority over others. There's a great lesson about leadership in this Upanishadic story. this mode of being, this way of being, valuing everyone in the corporation, everyone in the institution, everyone in the family, everyone in the community. This in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, this is what is called the yajna mode of being. Yajna mode of being, where each one is invited to contribute to the well-being of the whole so that the common good prospers. Saha yajna prajasrishtva purovacha prajapati. That the Creator himself said in Bhagavad Gita is quoted, Saha yajna, I created with this method of yajna. Anena prasavishyadhvam eshavo twishta kamadhuk. This is your kamadhuk. Kamadhuk is that mythological cow, that fulfills all desires for the one who has it. This is your kamadhuk. By nourishing each other, you are also nourished. I think this is the one of the significant insights of this Upanishadic metaphor of the organs contending among themselves, often closely bringing themselves to disaster. But beyond this, there are other important insights to consider. While it is true that the physical breath, which is named here as prana, is necessary, it is vital for the sustenance of life in the body. In the Upanishads, but in the Hindu tradition broadly, it is not considered to be the true source of life. The physical breath, breathing, is a sign, a symbol of that which is the ultimate source of all life and all physiological processes. And the Upanishads identify that. This is what we speak of as Brahman, as Atman, the infinite present in all beings, the foundation, the ground of life. So while other organs of the body cannot function in the absence of the breath itself is dependent on the presence of Atman, Brahman. And you remember, those, we studied the Kena Upanishad a little while ago. The Kena Upanishad describes Brahman in this expression, pranasya prana. Pranasya prana. It is the breath of the breath. In so many different ways, it comes to that point. Srotrasya srotram, the air of the air. Is that because of which the air hears? Manaso mano yad, that because of which the mind has the capacity to think. Vacho havacham, that because of which the tongue speaks. Sa'u pranasya prana. The physical breath depends on something more fundamental, which is called the breath of breath. Or we might say, the breath of life. The same text, Kena Upanishad describes Atman, Brahman, the divine God, as the one because of whom the breath is drawn. Yet pranena na praniti yena prana praniyate, that which you cannot breathe, but because of which you breathe. Yena prana praniyate tadeva Brahma, that is Brahman, tad vidhi. That because of which the breath moves in and out. So many beautiful passages in the Upanishads making this point. Katha Upanishad describes Brahman as the one who pushes, because of whom intake and inhalation and exhalation occurs. He is the one who sends prana upward and who leads apana downwards. Taittiriya Upanishad puts it very beautifully. Who would breathe in and who would breathe out if God be not there? Who would breathe in and who would breathe out in the absence of God? So while Brahman, present as Atman, and not the physical breath, is the one without which the body will be worst off, it is quite common in the Upanishads to speak of God, to use the language of life breath, as one of the terms for Brahman. One of the most important metaphors used to describe Brahman in the Upanishads is breath. In fact, one of the root meanings of the word Atman is breath also. And you find, the conversation again in another chapter of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where the question is asked, Katam eko devo iti. Who is that one being? And the text is prana iti sa Brahma. It is life breath. That is Brahma. So it is pranasya prana, the breath of the breath of the breath of the breath. It's there also. You could find similar examples in other traditions where the metaphor of breath is used for the divine. So this brings me to the point that, I'm speaking now of the physical breath. The breath sustains existence in the physical body, right? Physical breathing. It nourishes, it keeps alive the cells, the organs, replenishes them, vitalizes them. It sustains us, whether we are aware of it or not. Most of the times we are not aware even that we breathe. How many times, we even think of the reality of breathing that sustains life. So in a similar way, Brahman, present in the human body as Atman, nourishes life. The physical body is neither self-existent nor self-sustaining. In the absence of the divine, as Chandogya Upanishad puts it, the body will not live. It's a mass of lifeless matter. In the absence of the divine, there is no seeing, there is no hearing, there is no smelling, there is no touching, there is no tasting, there is no thinking. This is, again, coming back, this is the Kena Upanishad. Srotrasya srotram, chakshusha chakshuhu, the eye of the air of the air. Manaso manoyat, the mind of the mind, and so on. All of these are lifeless physical organs. It is only the presence of Brahman as we've discussed, as awareness that enables the physical to manifest life. It is very much, if you want an analogy of the electric bulb that allows you to see now sitting in your homes. The bulb is a physical structure, but it is the electrical current that allows that physical structure to be a life-giving source. If it is not there, there is no light. So the relationship between Brahman, the divine, and the human body, with the senses, as we saw in this, with the mind, is not like the relationship, let us say, between a robot and the robot maker. So we may say that a robot, or a robotic toy, if you wish, functions because of the maker of the robot, that it moves, it turns, we can make very sophisticated robots today. The robot maker designed the robot, and in this general way may be described as being responsible for its movement and for its activity. But the robot maker is not necessary. It is not necessary for the robot maker to be present in the robot for it to function. In fact, it can function even after the robot maker passes away. But in the case of this human body, the difference is that the divine is present moment to moment. This is the Upanishadic teaching. This is Kena and every other Upanishad. It is because of which at this moment we see. In its absence, we will not see. It is because of this one that at this moment we hear, we smell, we taste, we think, we move, we exist. It's a very different relationship. It's not a distant. It is intimate, immediate, present always, moment to moment, that ensures life in the body, ensures the functioning of the body. Even if you hear me now and you see me, it is because of that one. That which the eyes do not see, but because of which the eyes see. That which the air does not hear, but because of which the air hears. That is Tadeva Brahma Tvam Vidhi. Know that that is the infinite divine one. That's the teaching of the tradition. We are not separate from it. It doesn't live apart, doesn't exist apart from us somewhere in the distant universe. It is the reality because of which everything, there is life. It is life, I can say that. It is life itself. Everything else is inert, non-living matter. It is that which vitalizes and makes possible life in the body. The second point that or third point I want to make, and perhaps I will stop there in the interest of time. We can breathe, for most of our lives and not be aware that we do. We recall how vital breathing is to us only when we struggle to breathe, just as we can be inattentive to that because of which we breathe, the infinite Brahman. But although we may think of and we may speak of my breath as something that belongs to me or to you, breath is common to all of us. Not only common from all of us, but we draw from the same air, from the same atmosphere that in which we live, which surrounds us, which fills our lungs. We are all vitalized because of the same vayu, the same air. While we breathe individually, we draw our nourishment from the same source, the same air. Shared source, a shared atmosphere unites us, connects us all with each other and with all living beings. In the same way as Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and this wonderful tradition teaches, we are all sustained, all bodies are sustained by that one source. Our bodies are different, our minds are different. Even as our lungs are different, we draw from the same air. Our bodies are different, our minds are different, but all bodies and all minds, all organs of action, all sense organs, all antakaranas, all intellects, all minds are vitalized by one divine reality. Aham Atma Sarvabhuteshu. I am the one abiding, Sri Krishna says, in the hearts of all. Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hriddeshe Arjuna Tishtati. And that's That's the important insight, we should always remember. That insight is the foundation of our ethics, the foundational source of why we have to enter into relationships of compassion, of care, of justice for each other. It is the source of dharma. It is the reason why we must overcome excessive individualism, which is what the story is concerned about. We have to overcome the organs were started to become self-centered, wanted to know, who was the most exalted, who can we put first and who can we put last, not realizing that all of them are dependent on something also that is more fundamental than each one of them. Even the breath is dependent on pranasya prana, the breath of breath. So these are just a few thoughts about how we can draw from this Upanishadic story, how it can become relevant to us. There's no end to reflecting and thinking about beautiful encounters in the Upanishads like this one. That's why they endure, because what they teach endures. What they teach remains eternally relevant and important to us. So I invite you to continue reflecting on the story that we shared today. I will stop here.